Hey everybody, how's it going? Azren the language nerd here. I hope you're having a fantastic day, morning, evening, night, whatever it is for you right now. As you are watching this video, it is currently nighttime for me. It's 12:50 a.m. So some of you may call that morning, some of you may call that nighttime, depends on your perspective. Fun fact about me, in case you didn't know, I am much more of a night owl. So I usually sleep at about 2 in the morning, which people are like, "What? That's so late." But then get this, I wake up at like 9:45, 9:30, 10 a.m. So I still get, if you do the math, I still get 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep every night. Pretty, actually, very, very, very consistently. And so that's how I operate. And so here we are, 12:51 in the morning, and I am recording another video in this course on how to learn a foreign language. As a reminder, if you're watching this course, sorry, I got distracted by this little cord being twisted up. If you're watching this course on YouTube or Instagram or some other website, remember to check out the home page of this course, which is azrenthelanguagenerd.com/free course. That is spelled AZ or ZREN, thelanguagenerd.com/free course. That's the home page for this whole course that I've put together with all the different levels, all the videos, all the materials, everything in order. That's also where you would purchase the workbooks for this course here, in case that is something that interests you. So without further ado, let's continue this course where we left off last time. I will share my screen as usual. Here we go. So let's continue where we left off, which is at our common adjectives stage. So here we have a person in the bottom right corner saying, "I'm a smart student." So smart is an example of an adjective. In case you don't know what an adjective is and what an adjective is a describing word. It's a word that we use to describe something else. So for example, we have that is a brown dog. Well, brown is an example of an adjective. And so adjectives are a very important piece of learning another language. They're crucial. We use them all the time. And this particular chapter here is focused on helping you learn different adjectives. And what I've done is let me skip ahead a bit. I've actually gone ahead and identified what adjectives you should learn first. These are based on frequency, meaning what adjectives are used the most often, as well as by usefulness, just the types of adjectives that would be useful for people to know how to say. Okay. It's important to realize that every single language is going to treat adjectives a little bit differently. Sometimes the adjective is going to be in a different part of the sentence than what you're used to, for example. So if we take English, right, we would say a red phone. But in Spanish, you don't say a red phone, you say a phone red. Un teléfono rojo, right? We would never say un rojo teléfono. So the word for red actually goes at the end. It goes after our noun. And not only that, in Spanish, for example, you don't just have one word for red, you actually have multiple words for red, depending upon the gender of the noun as well as the number of the noun. And so every single language is going to treat adjectives a little bit differently. And it's not always going to be quite as straightforward as an adjective would be in English. So as I've said, I'm going to say this throughout the whole course, especially in the beginner section, because many beginners get caught up on this. I find that, excuse me, I find that it's really important to remember that when you encounter something that isn't very straightforward in another language, or rather, it's less straightforward than it is in your language, aka English or whatever it is. In that situation, it's very important for you to first, I've said this many times throughout the course, first and foremost, it's important for you to learn some generalized ways that you can just use, even though they're not always correct. So if you're learning Spanish, maybe you just learn rojo is red, and you don't worry about all the other forms of rojo in the beginning. You just stick with rojo for the time being, right? But slowly but surely, you start to learn the other forms. You do start to learn some of the other grammatical rules, and you start to go into, well, when do you say roja, roja? When do you say rojos? When do you say rojas? What's going on there? Why is that happening that way, etc., etc. Then you can start digging into it a little bit further over time, right? But initially, perhaps what you might want to consider is that you just learn a one or two forms right off the bat. So you have something that you can start to use. And then with time, you start to learn the other forms. So the adjectives I'd like you to learn first are colors. So here I've listed some colors on the screen. Oops, sorry, I zoomed out too much. There we go, colors. We're going to skip ahead just a moment. So we have colors. We have emotions and feelings. So I've listed out some different emotions and feelings. There are just some miscellaneous other ones that are good to know. Hot, cold, important, new, old, big, small, light, heavy. I think there's one more page. Yes. Easy, hard, smart, fast, slow, same, different, good, or kind, useful. And that's basically all of them. So these are the adjectives that you want to go and learn. I'm going to go back to the beginning here so you can see the list. I'll go nice and slow so you can pause and see what they are and digest that information. So we have colors right here. Okay. I've written a color activity that I would like you to do as well. In the previous part of this course, you learned how to say this is and that is. So you were saying things like this is a television, that is a horse, that this is a light, this is a heater, etc., etc. Well, now you're going to add a color in there. So I want you to say this is a gray television, this is a white wall, this is a black phone, this is a etc. For those of you who choose to purchase the workbook, I've included a page in here that you can actually write these on. And of course, you can make as many copies of this page as you would like. Okay, our next set of adjectives are some emotions. Again, I'll say this over and over because this is the biggest thing that people get caught up in. Remember, sometimes there may not be the best translation, a direct translation to into your target language. I'll give you a great example. Like something like French, okay? French would not say I am hungry or I am thirsty. They don't really say that. They have a different way of saying it. Even like I am bored. I am bored is not the logic of how they say being bored. There's a different logic, and grammatically it can be quite complex. And if it can be quite complex for a beginner because the phrasings are so different and you're like, what the heck? What's happening there? Like, what? It can be very confusing. So remember, in your language, that might happen. So what do? First, you just learn on a basic level. Okay, for example, if being bored is something really unique in the language you're trying to learn, first you just learn it as a phrase. Keep it simple. Okay, I'm bored. That's just what I say. I don't really know what's going on, but I'm just going to memorize that phrase. And then with time, you start to dig into the grammar, what's going on, why is it said that way, how does it apply in other circumstances, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Here I've written a couple of very, very simple translation exercises that you can use to practice translating some different sentences based on these emotions. Here are some more right here. We have some other adjectives right now: hot, cold, important, new, old, big, small, light, heavy, easy, hard, smart, fast, slow, same, different, good or kind, useful. And then an activity where you're going to write 5+ sentences using the common adjectives that were listed on the previous pages. Okay. You're going to make sure you get these corrected by your language partner or your tutor so that you know if you've done it correctly or not. Now, the question might become, Azren, how do I learn these adjectives? What do I do? Do I just go to Google Translate? What do I do? Well, my favorite option, like this is what I would do, like speak with your tutor or speak with your language exchange partner. I would probably, if I were you actually, maybe in advance, you use something like Google Translate, you use something like an online translator. Maybe you Google something, you go onto YouTube and you search common adjectives, and you start to see what they are, and you start to go through them, and you start to watch some videos, and many of those common adjectives, they're going to be the ones on the list. They're going to be the ones I provided you here. Like, it's not going to be that complicated, right? So you might maybe start by using the internet and Google and YouTube to figure out how to say these, but then make sure you confirm them with your language exchange partner or your tutor, because sometimes Google translates wrong, or sometimes, Google Translate might have given you a specific word, but there's more that you have to know about that word to be able to use it properly. The classic example would be something like, in French, you have the word excité, which in a dictionary is going to show as excited, like I'm excited for something. But the reality is that excité is often used for being aroused or something like that. And so, but you wouldn't get that out of Google Translate. That's not really something you would see. You'd have to talk to a native speaker or minimally an advanced speaker to be able to get that context. And so I think it's important to always, everything the whole book I've put together, this whole program I've put together is based on having one or multiple native or advanced speakers that you can talk to just to confirm everything, right? So that's important. So as a recap, you can just talk to your tutor or your language exchange partner to figure out how to say these things, or you can Google it, YouTube it in advance, and then double check it with your tutor or language exchange partner. Very good. Look at us go. We're building the foundations. You're building the foundations of the language. It's really exciting, super, super exciting. You're getting those initial connections made. You're learning how to structure some sentences. You're learning about word order with the adjectives and colors, and you're expanding your vocabulary. You're learning some basic phrases. You're doing all these activities. Ooh, this chapter here is particularly good. So once you learn your colors, learn some adjectives, what you can do, if we rewind in our program, if we go back to this activity that we talked about last time, right? The toddler activity, where you're walking around your house or a park and you're asking your tutor, what's this? What's that? You grab it, you start to fold it. Oh, how do you say fold in Japanese? And you start to use this explorative strategy, which we discussed in the previous video. You can actually start to combine some of these adjectives and redo this activity now that you've expanded your vocabulary a bit. And you might say, hey, teacher, look, it's a green cup. Wow, look. And you can start to really make connections. I'm a big fan of learning languages in a full body way, where it's not just you sitting at your desk writing and just doing it completely in a one-dimensional rote style of learning. I want you on your feet if we can. I want you using kinesthetic stuff. I want you to use your body. I want you to use your eyes. I want you to use your ears. I want you to touch. I want you to move. I want you to engage the senses and do it in a full body way. Maybe not all the time, because that's not always practical, and there is value of sitting there and reviewing something on your phone, using an application, etc. But I'm a big fan of engaging the senses. Okay. So you've gone through these common adjectives. Let's fast forward here. Okay. Why don't we do 2 and 1 today? In the past couple of videos, I've done 1 unit per video, but let's do 2 units in today's video. Let's get 2 done at the same time. Brought some water today. I thought ahead. Sometimes my mouth gets dry, but this time I brought some water. Okay. Let's learn about subject pronouns, negation, and interjections. Some of you may be reading this and wondering, what does that even mean? What are those terms? Well, let's talk about it. So this is a very exciting step, because once you've gone through this, you're going to be able to literally more than double all the different things that you know how to say in your target language. How exciting, is it not? Okay. So we're going to start with these subject pronouns here. Okay. So in English, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 major subject pronouns. These are the subject pronouns that I've written on the screen. We have I, you, he, she, it, we, and they. Other languages have different numbers of subject pronouns. For example, in Gujarati, language I speak, we have hun, which is I. We also have me, which is I. This is used in different contexts. We have tu and tame, which are both you. We have e, which is he and she, but then you could also say te, which is also he and she. Then we have ame, which means we, but then we have another we, which is called apne. Then we have teo, which means they, And then we have, well, you could also say something like e loco, which is a more informal they. It's not really they, but it's used as the word they. So we have quite a few, our subject pronouns in Gujarati are quite different than English. And that's going to happen in many languages. I think I shared the story of Thai. I don't know if this is true, but it's beside the point. It's even if it's not true, it still demonstrates my point very well. Someone was telling me that Thai has something like 100 subject pronouns because the word you use for you or he, or maybe it's for he and she, I can't remember, but the word you use for he and she depends upon the person's age in relation to you. And then there's different ways you can say it depending on how old they are in relation to you and their status in relation to you. So there's quite a few different words. So as I've said a million times throughout this series, and I'm going to keep saying it over and over because people forget, and it's one of the most important things, there will not always be direct translations for the words and phrases and such that you're trying to learn, right? There might be 7 ways to say he in your target language, and that's okay. That's cool. If that's the case, then well, you're going to have to learn them slowly but surely. So I would start with learning 1 or 2 and just default to using those, right? And with time, you're going to learn the rest. Let's go back here. One thing you may want to do is if you have a language that has lots of these subject pronouns, you may want to approach this with the same strategy that you would approach learning genders. So when you learn a gender, like languages like Gujarati has gender, French has genders, Spanish has genders, right? Many languages have genders. Well, in a gendered language, where so you have masculine, feminine, maybe masculine, feminine, neuter, right? When you have these genders, every time you learn a word, you have to learn the word with its gender immediately right from the get-go. And you're going to forget sometimes, and that's totally cool, right? But all of a sudden, this is not a phone. In English, we say phone, right? This is phone, a phone. But in French, you have to know it's un portable. The word for phone in your brain, you need to save it in your brain as un portable and not portable because you need to get that gender in there. And you might have to do it like that. Like maybe you're not going to learn the individual word for he. Maybe you're going to learn something like maybe you're going to learn something like my brother, he said this. And maybe you have to learn it in a phrase because you know with your brother you use this form of he. I did that for Mandarin for family words because they have different family words than in English. So I would memorize like my cousin Sonia, right? I would remember, oh, this is the word I'd use in Mandarin for Sonia. Okay, that's what that means. So I'm making a different connection because sometimes there isn't a direct translation. So you've got to make an alternate connection. I hope that makes sense. It's really hard to explain in such a video format. I'm better at explaining that when I can work with you one-on-one. I can actually know you and really help make those connections. But hopefully I'm being as clear as I can in this kind of format. If you ever have any questions, just maybe email me. And I do my best to answer every email and help you guys out and do what I can. But so feel free to email me. Just go to my website, the main website here, azrenthelanguagenerd.com/free course, and you'll find a button to email me there. So, okay. So I've put a little table here where you can fill out the subject pronouns in your target language. Probably your best bet here is to speak with your tutor or your language exchange partner. Of course, as I said before, you can YouTube it first or Google it first and get an initial idea of what the subject pronouns are, and then just get it corrected by your tutor or your language exchange partner. If there's ever one of these subject pronouns that doesn't exist, maybe just put NA in the chart in this table. And don't forget to use your memory hooks to like help you remember the word, especially if there's lots and lots of subject pronouns. And like it's not just one simple word for I, you're going to need memory hooks to help you differentiate between the different words for I or you or he or whatever it is. I've given you, for those of you that purchased the workbooks, I've given you an additional table here in case there's additional subject pronouns that you want to write down. You can make as many copies of this sheet as you would like. And then, of course, here I have a sheet where you can make any additional notes about subject pronouns. And of course, you may need lots of pages if your language has very, let's say, unique subject pronouns that you're not used to seeing. Subject pronouns are so powerful because up until this point, we haven't learned them. And so you don't necessarily know how to say he did something or you did something. All you know how to do is describe the world around you, right? This is a book. This is that. What's that? Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Part 2 here of this chapter is interjections. So interjections, you're not going to find these in any kind of beginner textbook. I don't think I've ever seen any beginner program that includes these. But for me, they're pretty important because the goal, see, what happens to a lot of language learners is they go try to learn a language. And even when they're like an intermediate level, the language doesn't feel natural. It really feels clunky. They speak really slowly. They can't form the words. And it feels really challenging. And the reason is that one of the reasons for this is that I believe it's important from the beginning, from day one, to to go about learning the language in such a way that the knowledge that you have in your mind, in your head, is comes out of your mouth and you recognize it and feels almost as natural as your first language. So I'll give you an example. I speak very little Japanese, but the Japanese that I do know, it's just as natural and it comes just as quickly to my mind as my English. My English is way stronger, but because I know way more in English. But what I have studied in Japanese, I've studied it in such a way that it's now in my head, and I know it. Like I just know how to use it. Now I only know like 7 things, right? But I know those 7 things cold. I know them super well. And this is how I've tried to structure this program, is to make those deep connections in your mind. So this step here ties directly into that. Interjections are spontaneous, here they are sudden and spontaneous utterances used to react to what someone else said. So if I tell you, for example, hey, what's the square root of 999 million? You might go, ooh, I don't know, man. Those are interjections. They're just random sounds that come out of your mouth, or maybe little words here and there, right? That just come out of your mouth without even realizing it. They're unconscious. And often, especially when you're a beginner in another language, you're going to get stuck all the time. You're going to get lost for words often. You're going to need to think, you're going to have to like pause, and you want to do that in the target language. And every language has different words for ooh, what, huh? Like those kinds of words. Every language has different words and sounds for those. Okay. So you're going to want to learn those words and start to use them. I'll give you an example. Like in French, they don't say they say ba, or, sometimes in like a language, I met people that how do I say this? Like when they start to get confused, they'll be like, whoa, 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 I don't understand. Can you say that again? And you want to do that in your target language. It's okay to be like, whoa, 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 I didn't understand. Can you say that again? That's totally fine to say that because you're overwhelmed, but you want to say that in the language you're trying to learn. So remember, in the very beginning of this curriculum, like 2 videos ago, in the very first pages, I told you one of the first things you want to learn how to say is, I don't understand. Now, when you learn some of your interjections, you're going to be able to say something like, whoa, I don't understand. Can you say that again? And you can say that in the target language very naturally, comes across nicely. You don't come, you did it in the target language, and you're training your brain to say, hey brain, listen up. We're using the target language to learn more of the target language. We don't use English to learn the target language. We use the target language to learn the target language, because I'm trying to grow a target language baby in my mind. We're not trying to train English Azren to speak Japanese. We're trying to grow a baby that's called Japanese Azren, and Japanese Azren has to grow inside the brain. Does that make sense? And that's one thing you're doing with these interjections. So I've listed 3. There's lots of interjections in every language. I've just listed 3, and you could learn more if you want to. And maybe there's some that you think are useful or you come across or you hear all the time. I've listed 3 for now. One is okay, like, oh, okay, cool, okay, like that kind of okay, really useful to know. Like in Spanish, Spanish is actually, it's always okay, but in French, it's like d'accord. It's quite different, right? You could say okay as well. You could say that, but there is a French word for it. Mandarin, you've got a couple options. You might say, oh, 知道了, right? That's another Mandarin option or whatnot. So that's a really useful one. You might want to say, really? Like you hear something and you're like, whoa, really? What? Another one is like, right? Like, for example, if you go, I don't know why I put an exclamation mark actually. There should be it should just be a question mark. I think that's a typo. Maybe I'll change that before this right after I finish this. So this right here is not right. It's more like right. So for example, if I go to you and I say, hey, um, in Japanese, phone is ketai, right? And I want to say that right. You might want to learn how to say that in a language too. These you're probably, I mean, you might be able to Google it and find it, but you're probably going to have to ask your tutor. And this is going to be a complicated question. They might not really understand what you're asking. They're going to be like, wait, what are you trying to find out? They might get a little confused, but just be persistent and try to explain it. And eventually they'll be able to figure it out and they'll know how to help you. Okay, here's a sheet you can use for additional notes. And lastly, we'll go to negation, and then we'll wrap this video up. We have some negation here, and then we'll wrap up before we get to asking questions. We'll leave questions for the final, for the next video here. Okay. So negation is where you say, basically, in English, we use the word not to negate sentences. So this is a cow, this is not a cow, for example. And every language is going to have a different way that negation works. In French, for example, it's actually kind of complicated a little bit in comparison to English. Like it's not exactly that simple, but regardless, every language has their own system, and this is the right time to learn that system. You can YouTube it to learn, you can Google it, do whatever you want, but Google like negation in Japanese, how does it work? You can Google it, watch some videos, whatnot, or just ask your tutor, language partner, whatever you want to do. There's lots of ways you can learn it, but this is a great time to learn this. And what I've done in this chapter is I've combined two things. I've combined negation with jobs. So that way you can learn some common professions and you can learn how to negate things. So up here, you're going to learn how negation works. You have to talk to your tutor. You have to Google it. You have to figure this out. Okay. Then you're going to have to go learn your common job titles. And then you're going to do this activity here. You're going to write down in this box, I'm a lawyer in your target language. In this box, you're going to write down, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a doctor. Okay. There's a chance you don't know how to say I am. So you might have to ask. You might have to go learn that. You might not have gotten that so far in the program. You might have to go ask someone or Google that or YouTube that. Right? So you're going to say, I'm a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a doctor. Right? Here we go. You're a manager. You're not a manager. You're a teacher. He's an accountant. They're not accountants. They're cashiers. She's a nurse. They're not nurses. They're engineers. We're artists. We're not artists. We're musicians. This might take you some time. I think, depending on the language, depending on how you've been studying the language up until this point and how deep you've gone into studies and your approach and this, that, the other thing, what apps you're using and blah, 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 like depending on everything, right? Depending on all that, this might take you some time. This might be a challenging task that's not going to come instantly, and this might take you longer than what you may expect. Because I think there's some knowledge that you're going to need here that you may not have, like some verb conjugations. There might be things here, so you might need to get help from your tutor. You might have some grammar questions, and this might not be the easiest thing in the world. Okay? And that takes us to the end of that chapter. Before we finish up this video here, I'd like to go back to level 0 for a moment, and I just want to remind you, because it's worth a reminder. Remember, every week, what you want to aim to be doing, if we just go back up, right? Sort of remind you guys, because it's a good time to remind you. Because it's easy to get sucked into what I've been talking about, but remember the overall picture. Remember, there's 5 types of activities you're doing every week, right? We have passive listening, which is optional, so you may choose not to do it. It's up to you. Remember, you got to do your listening practice, right? You're already getting lots of speaking. If you're following this level 1 curriculum, you're already getting lots and lots of speaking and time with the tutor. But just remember, like, I haven't given you any listening assignments yet in this particular chapter. I haven't given you a lot. The next level actually has a lot of listening assignments, quite a few listening assignments, like lots. It's a very listening heavy program, and there's lots of it there, right? So you're going to get that in level 2, but I haven't given you much here. But I still want to make sure you're doing your listening practice. I still want to make sure you are. Don't forget, okay? And don't forget to do your traditional homework, right? Don't forget these two. Right? It's easy to forget this one here and this one here because I haven't talked, too much about it recently. So just don't forget those two things. They're quite important. The revisit and review is coming quite shortly. It's going to come soon, and it's actually part built into the level 1 of program. So that's coming shortly. Don't worry too much about that one. But as a recap, let's make sure I'm going to put these on the screen. Pause if you forget what any of these mean. So pause at passive listening, read it again in case you forget. So here it is, passive listening. Speaking, you're doing a lot of that with your speaking partner and your tutor. Okay, here's the watching video. So pause, read it again, right? What do you do with this? Here's the next thing. Here's what you do with those speaking when you're watching the videos. So pause, look at this, right? Make sure you're doing this every week. This is important. Here's like what your worksheet might look like. Pause, read it if you're like, what are you talking about? Let me refresh your memory. Here it is. And here's a blank version in case you're like, how do I big this myself? Here's a blank version. You can, of course, purchase the workbook, and I give you this, but. And then we have traditional homework. So pause, read this, right? Make sure you're doing this too. This is important. Okay. This is coming. Don't worry about this. This is actually built into level 1. You're going to see it right at the end here. If we scroll down, right at the last page, right? The last page of the workbook has that revisit and review built into the program. So that's going to be, you'll have that. So don't worry too much. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay, everyone. Thanks for watching this. I hope you're enjoying the course. Hope you're learning a lot. And we will talk very soon. Bye-bye. See you.